Baiae, Italy, the year 138. There is a man sitting alone in a room that faces the sea. He is not young. His hands shake slightly when he holds the stylus. His breath comes with effort. The way breath comes when the body has started the long argument, it always wins. Outside the window, the Bay of Naples is doing what it has always done, catching the light, turning it into something almost too blue to look at directly. Indifferent to what is happening in this room, he writes. Not a decree, not a treaty, not the kind of document that moves armies or changes borders or reminds distant governors who holds the final word on everything that matters in the known world. He writes a poem, 4 lines. He has been working on them for days. The way you work on something when you know it is the last thing and you want it to be right, but you also know that right is no longer fully available to you. The poem is addressed to his own soul. Animula, vagula, blandula, hospes cumesque corporis, quae nunc abibis in loca, pallidula, rigida, nudula, little soul, little wanderer, little charmer, guest and companion of the body. Where are you going now? To a place that is pale, rigid. Bare. He does not answer the question. The poem does not answer the question. It just asks it. In the voice of a man who has spent his entire life drawing lines around things, defining edges, deciding where one thing ends and another begins, and who now finds himself at the one boundary he cannot draw. He does not know where his soul is going. The most powerful man in the world does not know. That is where this story ends. Now, go back 16 years. Britain, the year 122. A soldier is standing at the edge of the known world, and the wind is doing what wind does in northern Britain, which is everything at once, cold and wet and relentless, the kind of wind that gets inside your armor and stays there. Behind him, to the south, is the Roman Empire, roads, cities, law, the whole magnificent, exhausting machine that has been running for centuries, digesting the world piece by piece, turning foreign places into provinces and foreign people into taxpayers. Ahead of him, to the north, is fog, just fog. An order has come down from Rome, from the emperor himself. They are going to build a wall. The soldier looks at the fog. He picks up his tools. He does not know that the man who sent this order is the same man who will one day sit alone in a room facing the sea and write a poem to his own soul and not know where it is going. He does not know that both things, the wall and the poem, are the same question. The whole story is in the distance between them. He drew the borders of the known world. He could not draw one around grief. This is the story of everything in between. Italica, Hispania. Sometime around the year 76, there is a city in what is now southern Spain that most people have never heard of. It sits in the river valley of the Guadalquivir, in a landscape of olive trees and red earth. And it was founded by Roman soldiers who settled there after a war that happened 2 centuries before anyone in this story was born. It is not Rome. It is not even close to Rome. It is the kind of place that exists because empires need places to put their veterans, functional and orderly and completely provincial, in the way that places are provincial when the people who make decisions have never needed to go there. This is where the story of the Roman Empire's most complicated emperor begins. Not in a palace, not on a battlefield, in a mid-sized town at the western edge of the Roman world, in a family that was Roman enough to matter, but far enough from the center to know that the center was something you had to earn your way into. His full name was Publius alias Hadrianus. He was born into a family that had produced senators and officials, people who had made the long climb from the provinces into the machinery of Roman power and understood exactly how that climb worked. His father held the rank of praetor, respectable, serious, the kind of man whose name appears in administrative records and then stops appearing, which is what happened when Hadrian was around 10 years old. His father died, and the person who stepped in as guardian was a man named Marcus Ulpius Traianus, who would later be known as Trajan. The future emperor of Rome became the guardian of the future emperor of Rome, and neither of them knew it yet. And that is either the most Roman thing that ever happened or the most human thing, depending on how you look at it. What does it do to a boy to grow up watching power from that angle? Not inheriting it, not born into its center, but close enough to see how it actually works, which is different from how it is supposed to work, which is different again from how it looks from the outside. Hadrian learned Latin the way every Roman child learned Latin, but he also learned Greek. He learned it early, and he learned it well, and he learned it with the particular enthusiasm of someone who has discovered that the world is larger than the place they grew up in, and wants to know exactly how large. The Romans of his era had a complicated relationship with Greek culture. They had conquered the Greek world 2 centuries earlier, absorbed it politically, and then spent those 2 centuries being slowly, quietly conquered back in every way that did not involve armies. Greek philosophy, Greek architecture, Greek theatre, Greek ways of thinking about what a beautiful life looked like. The empire ran on Latin, but it dreamed in Greek, and everyone knew it. And some Romans found this embarrassing, and some found it thrilling, and most found it both at once. Hadrian found it thrilling. His contemporaries noticed. They gave him a nickname that was meant to be an insult. They called him Greculus, Little Greek. The implication was clear enough. A Roman who loved Greece too much had confused his loyalties. He wore the nickname the way you wear something someone gives you as an insult when it turns out to fit. There is a teacher somewhere in Italica, a man whose name does not appear in any surviving record, who taught young Hadrian Greek when Hadrian was small enough that the language still felt like a game rather than a subject. He was probably a Greek-speaking freedman or a tutor imported from the eastern provinces, the kind of person that wealthy provincial families hired when they wanted their children educated properly. He sat across from this boy and taught him the words for things. The Greek words, the old words, the words that had been used to write the Iliad and the Odyssey and the tragedies of Sophocles, words that carried inside them a whole different way of understanding what mattered and why. He probably did not think he was doing anything significant. He was doing his job, teaching vocabulary, correcting pronunciation, moving on to the next lesson. He was handing a child the key to an obsession that would last a lifetime and reshape an empire. When Hadrian was around 14, his father was gone, and Trajan was his guardian, and the distance between Italica and Rome was becoming less of a physical fact and more of a question he needed to answer. The question was not complicated. It was just this: what do you do with a Roman identity when you have grown up on the edge of the Roman world and fallen in love with a civilization that Rome conquered? He did not answer that question at 14. He spent the rest of his life answering it. The answer he gave was built in stone and enacted in law and carved into the landscape of an empire. And it was also written in 4 lines, addressed to his own soul, in a room facing the sea, when he was 62 years old and running out of time to revise it. But that comes later. For now, he is a boy in Italica with good Greek and a dead father and a guardian who is going to become the most celebrated conqueror Rome has ever produced. For now, he is learning what Rome is from the outside, which turns out to be the only way to understand it clearly. Dacia, the year 106. The Danube River in late autumn does something specific to the light. It flattens it, turns the whole landscape into shades of grey and brown and a pale yellow that does not quite manage to be gold. The hills on the far bank are the kind of hills that look like they have been there forever and will be there forever, and do not particularly care what happens between them. On those hills, for the last time in a generation, there are Dacian warriors who have not yet surrendered. They will surrender. Everyone in the Roman camp knows it. The math has been done. The Dacian king Decebalus is dead, having chosen his own death over the particular humiliation Rome reserved for defeated kings, which was to be paraded through the streets of the city in chains while the crowd cheered. He understood what was coming, and he made his decision, and now his kingdom is being converted into a province, and his people are being converted into a labor force, and the gold and silver of Dacian mines are being converted into Roman currency. It is, by every measure Rome uses to measure such things, a total victory. Hadrian is there, not at the center of it. He has served creditably in the Dacian campaigns, held commands, done what junior officers do when a senior officer of Trajan's caliber is running the operation. He has watched Trajan. Trajan is everything Rome says a Roman emperor should be. He is physically imposing, the kind of man whose presence in a room changes the room. He leads from the front in a way that is not performance but genuine preference. He eats with his soldiers. He sleeps in camp conditions that would make most senators weep. He has a gift for the specific kind of loyalty that great commanders produce. The loyalty that makes men walk into situations they know are dangerous because the person asking them to do it has made clear he would walk in first. He is also, at this moment, standing at what will turn out to be the high water mark of Roman expansion. Nobody knows that yet. Standing in the Dacian campaign, watching the last resistance collapse, the Roman Empire looks like a machine that cannot be stopped. It has been expanding for 6 centuries. It has absorbed the Mediterranean world, North Africa, Gaul, Britain, large portions of the Near East. Every generation has added something. Every emperor has his list of conquests. The whole enterprise is built on a logic so deeply embedded that almost no one thinks to question it. The logic is this: Rome grows. That is what Rome does. That is what Rome is. Trajan believes this completely. It is not ideology for him. It is reality. The empire grows because strong men lead it, and the gods favor it, and the alternative, stopping, is not something that belongs in the Roman vocabulary. After Dacia, there will be a brief pause, and then Parthia. The Great Eastern Campaign, the dream of reaching the Persian Gulf, of matching or exceeding Alexander, of extending Roman authority to the edge of the known world in every direction simultaneously. Hadrian watches all of this. He is good at watching. He has been doing it since Italica, since the years when he was close enough to Trajan to see how the machine worked, but far enough from the center to see it as a machine rather than as the natural order of things. There is a centurion in the Dacian campaign whose name the records do not preserve. He has been in the legions for 18 years. He has fought on the Rhine, the Danube, and now here. He has watched 3 emperors come and go. He is the kind of soldier that professional armies absolutely depend on and almost never formally acknowledge. The man who knows exactly how to take an order that makes no tactical sense and execute it in the way least likely to get his men killed. He is watching the Dacian hills too. What he sees is simpler than what Hadrian sees. He sees a campaign ending. He sees the familiar work of aftermath, securing positions, processing prisoners, beginning the long administrative conversion of a conquered territory into something Rome can tax and manage and defend. He has done this before. He will do it again. Probably, if his body holds. He does not think about what comes after Dacia. He thinks about what comes after this week. Hadrian thinks about what comes after Dacia. The eastern campaigns that Trajan launches in the final years of his reign are brilliant in the way that certain military operations are brilliant, meaning they achieve their immediate objectives with great skill and create problems that take generations to solve. Roman forces reach the Persian Gulf. Trajan stands on the shore and looks east. And there is a story, probably invented, but true in the way invented stories sometimes are, that he watched a merchant ship heading toward India and wished he were young enough to follow it. Then, the revolts begin. Behind the advancing Roman lines, in territories just conquered, the populations that were supposed to be pacified rise. Jewish populations across the eastern Mediterranean revolt simultaneously in what becomes known as the Kitos War. Mesopotamian cities that had accepted Roman authority weeks earlier are burning. The supply lines that an army too needs to sustain itself at the end of a 2,000-mile reach from Rome are overstretched in ways that even the best Roman logistics cannot fix. And Traian gets sick. The man who seemed like he would campaign forever gets sick somewhere in the east and starts the journey back to Rome and does not finish it. He dies in Cilicia in the year 117, in a province that is not Rome, on a road heading back to a city he has not seen in years. He is 63 years old. He has been emperor for 19 years. He has extended the Roman Empire to its greatest territorial extent in history. He has built a column in Rome that still stands today, carved with the story of his Dacian victories in a continuous spiral of stone that took years to complete and shows every stage of the campaign in more detail than any other ancient monument we have. He has left his successor a set of problems that the column does not mention. Hadrian is in Antioch when the news comes. He is commanding the Syrian army. He has been positioned there carefully, close to the center of events, without quite being in it, in the way that succession politics position people when the question of succession has not been officially answered. The official answer comes quickly, almost too quickly, within 2 days of Trajan's death. A document surfaces, an adoption document, Trajan formally adopting Hadrian as his son and heir. The document was witnessed by Trajan's wife, Plotina. Trajan was not conscious when he died, or was barely conscious, depending on which source you read. The document was produced by the empress. The timing was, to put it carefully, convenient. Did Trajan actually adopt Hadrian? Did Plotina act on instructions that Trajan had given her before he lost consciousness? Did she act on her own judgment about what was best for the empire? Did she act on something else entirely? Nobody alive in 117 can answer these questions with certainty. Nobody alive now can either. What is certain is that Hadrian became emperor, and what is equally certain is that he spent the first years of his reign knowing that some people, important people, people with armies and influence and long memories, were not entirely sure the document was real. The centurion from the Dacian campaign has retired by now. He is living somewhere in the provinces on his soldier's pension, doing whatever men do when they have given 20 years to the legions and the legions have released them. He hears the news about Trajan the way veterans hear news about the men who commanded them, with a particular kind of grief that is not quite personal and not quite political, but somewhere in between. He served under Trajan. He believed in Trajan. He has never heard of Hadrian. The empire he devoted his life to is now in the hands of a man he does not know, who came to power through a document that nobody fully trusts, who learned to love Greece before he learned to love conquest. He pours a drink. He thinks about the Dacian hills in autumn, the way the light flattened everything. He wonders, the way people wonder about things they cannot change. What happens next? Antioch, Syria, August 117. The message arrives before dawn. It does not arrive as a single message. It arrives as a series of messages, each one carrying more information than the last, building toward a conclusion that everyone in the Syrian command already understands before the final dispatch confirms it. That is how important news travels in an empire this size, not as a single moment of revelation, but as a tide coming in, each wave a little further up the beach than the last. Trajan is dead. Hadrian is emperor. There are men in that room in Antioch who receive this news in different ways. Some of them are relieved. Some of them are calculating. Some of them are genuinely uncertain whether what has just happened is legitimate in the way that Roman power is supposed to be legitimate, which is to say legitimate enough that no one with an army is willing to contest it. Hadrian himself receives the news with a stillness that people who were there later described as remarkable, not the stillness of a man who already knew, necessarily. The stillness of a man who had thought through this moment many times and decided in advance how he was going to behave when it arrived. He writes to the Senate. He is respectful. He is careful. He uses all the right language. He is also in the careful way of someone who understands that the first messages from a new reign set a tone that is difficult to change later, clear about something that previous emperors had sometimes obscured. He will not seek a triumph for Trajan's eastern campaigns. He intends to pull back from the territories that cannot be held. He is going to govern differently than his predecessor. The Senate reads this and feels several things at once, most of which are difficult to express politely. There is a senator in Rome, a man of the old families, the kind of family that has been producing senators for 4 generations, and has opinions about how things are supposed to work, that are as comfortable and as unmovable as furniture. He reads Hadrian's letter and then reads it again. The new emperor is giving back territory. He sits with this for a long moment. He knows, as any educated Roman knows, that the eastern territories Trajan took are a military problem. Everyone who has looked at the maps knows that holding Mesopotamia requires an army that Rome cannot sustain indefinitely at that distance. The supply lines are impossible. The communication delays alone mean that by the time an order leaves Rome and reaches a general on the Euphrates, the situation the order was responding to has already changed 3 times. He knows all of this. He also knows that Rome does not give things back. That is not what Rome does. The whole story Rome tells about itself is a story of accumulation, of addition. Every emperor adds something to the list. Every reign is measured against the reigns before it, by what was taken and what was held. To give something back is to introduce a word into the Roman vocabulary that the Roman vocabulary has never needed before. Retreat. He does not write down his opinion. He is a senator, not a fool. The first crisis of Hadrian's reign comes within months. 4 senior senators, men of enormous influence and military experience, men who had served Trajan and commanded legions and accumulated the kind of standing that makes people feel they have options, are accused of plotting against the new emperor. They are executed. All four. Hadrian issues a statement saying he did not order the executions. The Senate carried out its own judgment. He had nothing to do with it. The Senate, reading this statement, makes a collective decision not to press the question. Was Hadrian telling the truth? The ancient sources argue about it. Modern historians argue about it. The four men were real. Their deaths were real. The political threat they represented to a new emperor, whose legitimacy was already questioned, was real. What is also real is that after their deaths, no one with sufficient power and sufficient doubt about the adoption document decided to test whether the doubt was worth acting on. Make of that what you will. This is the foundation Hadrian builds on, not a clean inheritance, not a document everyone believes in, not the uncomplicated transfer of power from one great man to the man he chose, a foundation of ambiguity. Managed with precision, he spends the early years of his reign doing something that no Roman emperor has done with such systematic deliberateness. He goes to the Senate. He eats with senators. He discusses philosophy with them. History. Architecture. He is charming in the specific way of people who have studied charm as a survival skill, which is to say, he is genuinely interested in the people he is charming, which makes the charm almost impossible to resent. He also makes clear, in ways that are never quite explicit enough to be confrontational, that the question of whether his accession was legitimate is a question that has been answered and is not open for further discussion. The Senate accepts this. They accept it because the alternative is civil war. And civil war in the Roman world is a thing that even senators with opinions understand they do not want. They accept it because Hadrian is competent in ways that are immediately apparent. They accept it because the executions have already happened, and demonstrating retroactive enthusiasm for the men who were killed seems unwise. And they accept it because Hadrian, from the very beginning, gives them something that some of his predecessors had not bothered to give them. He gives them the performance of respect, not real power. The Senate has not had real power for a long time, and Hadrian does not intend to change that. But the performance of respect, the consultations, the dinners, the conversations about Cicero and Plato, the sense that the emperor sees them as something other than an obstacle to be managed, it costs him almost nothing. It purchases a great deal. There is a moment in the early years of the reign, probably around 118 or 119, when a senator who had been skeptical of Hadrian comes away from one of these dinners with a feeling he cannot entirely explain. He had gone in prepared to be polite and distant. He had stayed longer than he intended. He had talked about something he cared about and been listened to with what seemed like genuine attention. He walks home through the streets of Rome and tries to decide whether he trusts the new emperor. He cannot decide, but he realizes, walking home, that not being able to decide is very different from having decided against. Hadrian has bought himself time to figure out what he actually wants to do with the most powerful position in the world. He already knows. He has known for years. The question is whether Rome is ready to hear it. Rome. The year 118. There is a map on the wall of the room where Hadrian works in the early mornings before the day fills up with the business of being emperor. It is not decorative. Maps in the Roman world are working documents, practical things, covered in annotations and corrections, and the accumulated knowledge of soldiers and surveyors and merchants who have spent their lives moving through the territory the map represents. This one shows the empire at its maximum extent. Trajan's empire. The empire Hadrian has inherited And it is impressive in the way that things are impressive, when their scale is almost too large for the human eye to process at once. From the Rhine and Danube in the north to the Sahara in the south, from the Atlantic coast of Hispania in the west to the Euphrates and beyond in the east, 5 million square kilometers, 60 million people, maybe more. Every major city in the Mediterranean world, inside the lines. Hadrian looks at this map every morning. He is looking at a problem, not the problem that most Romans see when they look at a map like this. Most Romans look at a map like this and see glory, see the proof of everything Rome has always said about itself, that it is the natural center of the world, that its expansion is not conquest but civilization, that the lines on the map are not lines of force but lines of order, spreading outward from a city that the gods themselves chose as their instrument. Hadrian looks at a map like this and sees supply lines. He sees the distance between Rome and the Euphrates, roughly 2,000 miles, and he calculates what it costs to move a legion that distance and keep it supplied and pay it and rotate it and respond when something goes wrong, which something always does. He sees the gap between Trajan's final eastern frontier and the nearest reliable Roman base, a gap that cannot be bridged quickly enough when a revolt starts, which revolts always do in newly conquered territory. He sees an empire that has grown past the point where it can be effectively governed from the center, and then he makes the decision. He pulls back from Mesopotamia. He pulls back from Armenia. He abandons the territories east of the Euphrates that Trajan spent years and thousands of lives taking. He draws a new line, a shorter line, a line that corresponds to what Rome can actually hold rather than what Rome has most recently taken. He does this knowing exactly what it will cost him politically. The men who served under Trajan are still alive. The men who watched friends die in the Eastern campaigns are still alive. The families of those men are still alive. In Rome, in the army camps, in the provincial cities that have been celebrating Trajan's Eastern victories for years, there are people who understand the meaning of what Hadrian has just done and are not pleased about it. One of those people is a general whose name appears in military records from the Pantheon campaign, a man who commanded a cavalry unit in the final push toward the Persian Gulf. He is probably in his late 30s when the pullback order comes. He has given the best years of his professional life to this expansion. He has buried men. He trained himself in the dust of Mesopotamia. He has written letters home to families in Italy and Gaul and Spain, telling them that their sons died for Rome. Now he is being told to leave. He does not refuse. He is a Roman officer, and Hadrian is his emperor, and the order is the order. He prepares his unit for the withdrawal with the mechanical efficiency of a man who has learned to execute orders by disconnecting the part of himself that has opinions about them. But he does not disconnect entirely. He thinks, as the column turns west and the eastern horizon recedes, about what those deaths were for now. He has a Roman answer ready for that question. It is the answer he has given families in his letters, and the answer he has told himself in the dark hours when the question arrives uninvited. They died for Rome. They died for the empire. Their deaths have weight and meaning because they expanded the boundaries of civilization. That answer requires the boundaries to stay where the deaths put them. He rides west and does not look back, and keeps the thoughts where thoughts go when there is nothing to be done with them. In Rome, Hadrian is meeting with his advisors. The conversation is practical and uncomfortable in the way that practical conversations about uncomfortable decisions tend to be. Everyone in the room understands the logic of the withdrawal. Everyone in the room also understands that logic and optics are different things, and that the optics of the most powerful empire in the world, giving back territory, are bad in ways that logic cannot fully repair. Hadrian listens. He nods at the right moments. He asks clarifying questions that reveal he has already thought through the objections being raised. Then he explains his position, not as a defense, but as a statement of how he understands the problem. Rome does not have a supply problem at its eastern frontier. Rome has a conception problem. For centuries, the empire has understood itself as a thing that grows. Growth is not a strategy. Growth is an identity. And identities are very difficult to change without creating a crisis about what you are if you are not what you have always been. He is not interested in that crisis. He is interested in something else. He is interested in the question of what an empire looks like when it stops growing and starts lasting. That is a different project than conquest. It requires different skills, different priorities, different ways of measuring success. You do not measure it by what you have taken in the last decade. You measure it by whether the system you have inherited will still be functioning in the next century. He has thought about this for a long time. He is going to spend his reign answering the question. The Senate receives his explanation with the polite silence of people who are not sure whether they are witnessing statesmanship or weakness, and have decided to wait for more information before committing to either interpretation. The army receives it with less politeness and more silence. History will take 2,000 years to reach a verdict, and the verdict will be complicated, and Hadrian will not be around to hear it. He looks at the map again. The new lines, the shorter lines, the lines that correspond to what he has decided Rome actually is, rather than what it has been told to believe about itself. A boundary is not a defeat. That is what he believes. A boundary is a decision about what you are willing to defend and what you are not. A decision about what you are, rather than what you might become if you push far enough and pay enough. He has made the decision, now he has to make Rome believe it was the right one. That will take rather longer than the decision itself. It will, in fact, take his entire reign. And in the end, the question of whether he succeeded is still not entirely settled. But the wall he is about to build in Britain will still be standing 20 centuries later, which is one kind of answer. The Roman Empire. The years 121 through 125. Most emperors rule from Rome. They sit at the center of the machine, and the machine brings things to them. Reports from governors, tax figures, military assessments, petitions from cities and individuals seeking imperial attention. The machine is very good at this. It has been doing it for a long time. The roads exist. The courier system exists. The whole administrative apparatus exists specifically to funnel information toward the man at the center, so that the man at the center can make decisions and send those decisions back out along the same roads. It is an impressive system. It also has a fundamental problem that anyone who has ever run anything large enough will recognize immediately. The information that travels up through a hierarchy is not the same as the information that exists at the bottom of that hierarchy. It gets compressed, simplified, improved, in the way that people improve things before presenting them to someone with the power to punish bad news. By the time a report from a frontier garrison in Britain reaches Rome, it has passed through enough hands and been edited by enough people with enough different interests that it bears a complicated relationship to what is actually happening in Britain. Hadrian understands this. He solves it the way he solves most problems, which is directly and in a way that no one before him has tried at quite this scale. He goes, in the spring of 121, Hadrian leaves Rome. He does not leave for a military campaign. He does not leave to put down a rebellion, or negotiate a treaty, or perform any of the specific functions that have historically required emperors to travel. He leaves to look. He goes to Gaul. He goes to the Rhine frontier. He goes to Britain. He will spend the better part of the next 4 years moving through the empire's northern and western provinces. And then he will come back and reorganize what he has seen, and then he will go again. To the east, this time. To the Danube and Greece and Asia Minor and Syria and Egypt and everywhere else. He will spend more time away from Rome during his reign than any emperor before him. The people who manage his travel arrangements find this exhausting. The governors of the provinces he visits find it terrifying. The soldiers in the frontier garrisons find it somewhere between incomprehensible and electrifying. Because emperors do not show up in frontier garrisons. That is not how emperors work. Hadrian shows up in frontier garrisons. There is a man stationed at a fort on the Rhine, a centurion from one of the Gallic provinces who has been in the same posting for 3 years. His unit is competent, disciplined in the way that units are disciplined when they have been properly trained and left alone long enough to develop their own rhythms. He runs a tight operation. His men are well equipped and properly fed, and they know their duties. He has never met the emperor. He has never expected to meet the emperor. The emperor is an abstraction at this distance, a fas oncoin, a name in official documents, the source of orders that come down through so many layers of command by the time they reach him that they have lost any particular flavor of the individual who originated them. One morning, a column of riders comes through the fort gates, and the man at the front is not dressed the way emperors are dressed in official portraits. He is dressed practically. He looks like someone who has been traveling hard and does not consider this a problem. It is Hadrian. He wants to see the unit's equipment. He wants to inspect the barracks. He wants to talk to the men about their morale and their training and their opinions on the defensive situation along this stretch of the river. The centurion responds to this the way trained soldiers respond to unexpected situations they have not been briefed on, which is to execute their duties with perfect correctness and process the strangeness of the situation internally. Later, when there is time, he shows the emperor the equipment. He walks him through the barracks. He answers the questions. What he notices, somewhere in the middle of this, is that the emperor is actually listening, not performing the listening of a superior who has already made up his mind and is going through the motions of consultation. Actually listening, in the way that reveals itself through follow-up questions, through the specific detail of what gets asked next, through the sense that the information is being absorbed and evaluated rather than acknowledged and filed away. After Hadrian leaves, the centurion stands in his fort and tries to organize his impressions into something coherent. He does not fully succeed. What he has just experienced does not fit neatly into his existing categories for how power works. Power comes from above and flows downward, and the people above you do not generally show up in person to find out what you actually think. That is not the system. That is not how it works. Except that apparently it is. Now, for this emperor, he goes back to his duties. 3 days later, an order comes through changing the training protocol for his unit based on observations made during the recent imperial inspection. He reads it, implements it, notes that the change addresses something he mentioned during the conversation. He was heard. He files this away in the part of himself that keeps track of things that matter and goes on with his day. But it stays with him, across the empire. Variations of this scene are playing out. In Britain, where Hadrian orders the construction of the wall that will bear his name, but also inspects the troops in a way that results in specific changes to their equipment and drill. In Spain, where he visits the city of his family's origin and makes decisions about its development that reflect the particular attention of a man with a personal relationship to the place. In Athens, where the visit is different in quality from all the others, where the emperor, who has been inspecting military efficiency, suddenly becomes the man who wanted to belong to Greek culture since he was a child. He is building something on these journeys, not just gathering information, building a picture, comprehensive and detailed and deeply personal, of what the empire actually is versus what it is supposed to be. The two things are not always the same. There are provinces that have been run well by governors who understand their populations and manage the relationship between Rome and local culture with intelligence and care. There are provinces that have been run badly by men who arrived with assumptions and left without revising them. There are cities that are thriving, and cities that are struggling, and cities that are doing something in between that no report has managed to capture accurately. There is a magistrate in a mid-sized city in Asia Minor who has been sending reports to Rome for 5 years about conditions in his district. The reports are accurate. He takes some pride in their accuracy. He has worked to ensure that they reflect the actual situation rather than the situation he wishes existed or the situation he thinks Rome wants to hear about. When Hadrian arrives in his city, unannounced, in the middle of an ordinary administrative week, the magistrate is initially terrified in the way that any mid-level official is terrified when the person at the top of the entire hierarchy unexpectedly appears. Then the conversation begins and the terror becomes something else. The emperor has read his reports, not summaries, not condensed versions processed through 3 layers of imperial bureaucracy. The actual reports, he references specific figures. He asks about specific situations mentioned in dispatches from 2 years ago. He wants to know what happened next, and then what happened after that, and whether the conclusions in the reports turned out to be correct. The magistrate answers everything as accurately as he can. Which is accurately? Because he has been writing accurately for 5 years on the off chance that someone might eventually care. It turns out someone does. This is what Hadrian's journeys actually accomplish. Beyond the specific decisions and the specific reforms and the specific walls and buildings that result from them, they send a message through every layer of the imperial administration, through every governor and magistrate and military commander and city official in the provinces he visits, a message that travels faster than any official dispatch. The emperor is paying attention. He actually comes. He actually looks. He actually asks. This changes behavior in ways that no edict can change it. Because behavior changes when people believe they are being observed by someone who will notice and respond to what they see. The quality of local governance improves in ways that are difficult to measure but real. Reports become slightly more accurate. Problems get addressed slightly earlier. The gap between what the empire actually is and what it tells itself, it narrows slightly. Only slightly. Rome is an enormous machine, and one emperor cannot personally inspect all of it. The corruption and mismanagement and local abuses that are built into any system this large do not disappear because Hadrian visits one city in 10, but they become slightly less confident. And slightly less confident is not nothing. Hadrian covers perhaps 15,000 miles on his first extended tour. He does this on horseback and on foot as much as in a carriage, because he genuinely prefers it, because the army he inherited respects physical toughness, and he understands the value of being seen to share their conditions. He is not performing toughness. He was tough before he was emperor, in the campaigns under Trajan, in the military postings that preceded his accession. He is simply continuing to be the thing he already was. By the time he returns to Rome, he has seen more of the empire than any emperor who came before him. He has also, in the seeing, confirmed something he suspected, but could not fully know from a room with a map on the wall. The empire he has inherited is not one thing. It is many things, held together by roads and law and the shared fiction of Roman identity. But underneath that surface, it is a collection of distinct places with distinct histories and distinct ways of understanding who they are and what they owe to the entity that governs them. Some of those places have been folded into Roman identity so completely that the distinction has ceased to matter. Some of them maintain a separate understanding of themselves underneath the Roman surface. An understanding that is patient and quiet and does not go away simply because the official documents do not acknowledge it. He has seen all of this. He is going to build walls around some of it, and temples over other parts of it, and name cities after people he loves, and rename cities in ways that turn out to be catastrophic mistakes. But first he needs to build the wall in Britain. Because the wall in Britain is not about Britain. It is about what he has decided Rome is. Britain, the year 122. Stand at the wall on a November morning, and you will understand something that no map can tell you. The wind comes from the north, and it does not come politely. It comes, the way weather comes in this part of the world, as if it has made a decision about you personally and intends to follow through. The stone under your boots is slick with a moisture that is not quite rain and not quite frost. The hills roll away in every direction in shades of brown and grey and a green so dark it is almost black. And somewhere to the north, past the last Roman outpost, the land continues in exactly the same way. The same hills, the same colours, the same indifferent sky. There is no natural boundary here. That is the first thing you need to understand about Hadrian's Wall. It was not built at a river crossing or a mountain pass or any of the places where geography provides a reason for a line. It was built across open country, 73 miles of it, from the Solway Firth in the west to the mouth of the Tyne in the east, because the man who ordered it built decided this was where Rome ended, not because the land said so. Because he said so, the practical arguments for the wall exist, and Hadrian's engineers made them. Control the movement of people and goods across the northern frontier. Provide a base of operations for the garrison. Demonstrate Roman permanence in a province that had seen Roman forces advance and retreat multiple times over the previous decades. All of these arguments are real. None of them fully explain a wall this size. A wall built purely for military control does not need to be this substantial. The tribes to the north of the wall, the Caledonians and their neighbours, were a genuine problem, in the way that frontier populations are always a genuine problem. But they were not an existential threat to Rome. The Roman army, when fully deployed and properly supplied, could handle anything those hills produced. The wall was not necessary for survival. It was necessary for something else. There is a soldier from Syria standing in a British field in 122, and the distance between where he is and where he was born is a number that does not mean anything to him because it is too large to feel. He knows Syria. He knows the heat and the dust and the particular quality of light in the eastern provinces, the way it bleaches colour out of everything by midday and turns it all gold again at sunset. He knows the food and the language and the smell of the markets and the sound of the city he grew up in. He does not know Britain. Britain is cold in a way that Syria does not have a word for. Britain is wet in a way that seems personal. Britain smells of something he cannot name. A green, damp smell that has no equivalent in anything from his previous life. He is here because the Roman army moves its units across the empire with the casual thoroughness of an organization that does not particularly consider where you are from when deciding where you need to be. He was assigned. He came. He is now picking up stones in a British field and placing them on other stones because an emperor in Rome decided that this is where Rome ends. He places the stones. He does not think extensively about what they mean. He thinks about the weight of the stones and the cold of the morning and the fact that dinner is still several hours away. But there is a moment, sometime in the middle of a working day, when he straightens up and looks north. The fog is doing something to the light, turning it soft and grey and slightly unreal. The hills disappear into it at a certain distance, and what is beyond that distance is simply invisible. He looks at the fog for a moment, longer than necessary. Then he goes back to the stones. He will spend another 2 years in Britain before his unit rotates elsewhere. He will not think often about the wall after he leaves it. He will think about Britain the way soldiers think about postings they did not choose and did not enjoy, as a thing that happened to them rather than a thing they did. But his hands built something that is still standing. He does not know that. He has no way of knowing that. The idea that a structure he built in a cold British field in 122 will be visited by people speaking a language that does not yet exist, in a country that does not yet exist, would have been incomprehensible to him in the way that things are incomprehensible when they exceed every available frame of reference. He built a wall. He went home. He got old and died somewhere that the records do not preserve. The wall remained. The wall remains. Hadrian visits Britain in 122. He does not come to watch the construction. He comes because this is what he does now. He goes to the places, and he looks. And Britain is a place that has needed looking at for a long time. What he sees in Britain is a province that has been managed with the particular combination of competence and indifference that characterizes Roman provincial governance at its average. The cities in the south are functioning. The military infrastructure is adequate. The relationship between the Roman presence and the native population is the complicated, negotiated arrangement that develops everywhere Rome settles. Not exactly consent and not exactly pure coercion, but something worked out over decades of proximity that neither side fully chooses and neither side can easily escape. He also sees the north. The north is the problem that every governor of Britain has faced, and none of them has solved in a way that lasts. You can push into Caledonia. The army has done it. You can defeat the people you find there in the open field, which the army has also done. Repeatedly. You cannot hold it. The terrain works against you. The supply lines become impossible. The people melt back into the hills and wait, and the hills are very patient. So you pull back. And then the raiding starts again, across whatever line you have pulled back to. And then you push forward again. And the cycle repeats. Hadrian looks at this cycle and decides to end it with stone. He is not ending it by solving the underlying problem. He is ending the cycle by making a decision about what Rome is going to be responsible for and what it is not. Everything south of this line is Rome. Everything north of this line is not Rome. The wall is the sentence that ends the argument about where the boundary is. Not because the wall can prevent everything from crossing it, but because the wall makes the boundary undeniable. This is a different way of thinking about frontiers than Rome has used before. Rome's traditional answer to frontier problems was to push the frontier forward until the problem was behind you. That answer only works if you can always push forward. Hadrian is building an answer for when you cannot, or more precisely, for when you have decided you will not. The wall takes years to complete. At its peak, tens of thousands of soldiers and workers are involved in its construction. It runs through landscape that was not designed for convenience. It goes over hills and through boggy ground and across rivers. It has forts at regular intervals and smaller outposts between the forts and a ditch on the northern side and a road on the southern side, and everything that a serious military installation of this kind requires. It is, by any measure, an extraordinary engineering achievement. It is also, in the deepest sense, a philosophical statement. Here is where we stop. Not because we cannot go further, because we have decided not to. That distinction matters more than it might appear to. The difference between cannot and will not is the difference between a limit imposed from outside and a limit chosen from within. Rome is choosing its limit. Rome is drawing its own boundary. That has almost never happened before in the history of the empire, and it will not happen again in the same way. The senators back in Rome who are uncomfortable with the pullback from Mesopotamia are looking at the same impulse in different geography. They read it as weakness, as the first sign of an empire that has lost its confidence, as the beginning of something they do not want to watch. They are not entirely wrong. What Hadrian is doing in Britain is related to what he is doing in Mesopotamia. The question is whether the relationship is a confession of decline or a realistic assessment of sustainability. He believes it is the second thing. He is standing at the wall on a morning very much like the one this chapter began with, and he is looking north into the same fog, and the wind is making the same decision about him that it makes about everyone who stands here. He is not a sentimental man in the way that some powerful men are sentimental about the symbols of their power. He does not feel moved by the wall in the way that someone watching from outside might imagine he should. He sees a solution to a problem. He sees a line drawn in stone across a landscape that needed a line. But there is something else. He is standing at the furthest edge of the world he is responsible for. Behind him, everything belongs to him in the way that things belong to emperors. Every road, every city, every tax, every soldier, every dispute that gets escalated to imperial attention, all of it, from this point, south and east, is his problem. Ahead of him is fog, and he has decided, for the first time in Roman history, with this kind of architectural finality, that the fog does not need to be his problem. A wall does not only keep others out, it tells the people who build it where they believe the world ends. He looks at the fog for a moment that has no particular length. Then he turns back toward Rome. Athens. The year 124. There is a ceremony in Athens called the Eleusinian Mysteries, and it has been happening every year for roughly 2,000 years by the time Hadrian arrives in Greece, and it is one of the most sacred rituals in the Greek world, and almost no one outside it knows what actually happens during it. That is the point. You are initiated or you are not. The things you learn inside the ceremony are not things you speak of outside it. The penalty for revealing the mysteries was, historically, death. And while that penalty is not being enforced in the 2nd century, in the same way it was in the 5th century before the Common Era, the principle has survived. Some things are for those inside. Some things are not for those outside. Hadrian asks to be initiated. He asks not as the Emperor of Rome demanding a privilege that his power entitles him to. He asks as someone who genuinely wants to belong to what the ceremony represents. He goes through the proper preparation. He participates in the proper way. He becomes, formally and ritually, a member of something that Greek culture has been protecting for 20 centuries. The Athenians accept him. They accept him partly because refusing the Emperor of Rome is not a practical option. But they accept him also because Hadrian is not the kind of Roman who makes acceptance uncomfortable. He is not there to appropriate the ceremony or display it or convert it into a Roman version of itself. He is there because he has wanted to be there since he was a child, learning Greek in a provincial city in Spain. He is 48 years old, and he is finally doing something he has been waiting to do his whole life. The Romans who are watching this, the members of his entourage, the officials who travel with the imperial court and manage its relationship with the provinces it passes through, have a range of opinions about what they are witnessing. Some of them find it embarrassing. This is the Emperor of Rome, the man who commands 30 legions and governs 60 million people, and holds the fate of the known world in his administrative decisions. And he is wearing Greek ritual robes and participating in a ceremony that Greeks have been doing since before Rome existed as a concept. With what can only be described as sincerity, the nickname comes back to them. Graeculus, Little Greek. They think about it differently now than they did when it was applied to a provincial boy with too much enthusiasm for Greek literature. Now it is the emperor they are calling a little Greek, and they do it quietly, and only among themselves. Hadrian does not care. He has not cared for 30 years, and he is not going to start now. Athens gives him something that Rome does not give him and cannot give him, and he has known this for a long time, and the knowing has not resolved anything. It has just made him more deliberate about finding time for Athens. He comes back to Athens multiple times during his reign. He completes the construction of the temple of Olympian Zeus, which had been under construction on and off for 600 years, and which no one before Hadrian had managed to actually finish. 600 years. The project had been started by Athenian tyrants, continued by various rulers, abandoned when money ran out or political situations changed, resumed when circumstances permitted. It had outlasted the Athenian democracy that grew up around it, and the Macedonian Empire that superseded that democracy, and the various Hellenistic kingdoms that followed, and the Roman conquest that absorbed all of them. Hadrian finishes it. He does this not because a finished temple is useful in any administrative sense, but because it is Athens, and the temple has been unfinished for 600 years, and he is the person who finally has both the resources and the will to complete it. He also builds extensively in Athens. A new district, called Hadrianopolis, grows up to complement the ancient city. A library, infrastructure, the kind of investment that a patron makes in a place they genuinely love, rather than the kind an administrator makes in a province they need to keep functional. He is not doing this to advertise his affection for Greece. He is doing it because he believes something that most of his Roman contemporaries do not quite believe, or do not believe in quite the same way. He believes that Greece matters, not as a conquered territory whose culture Rome has absorbed and whose people are competent provincial administrators, as the source, as the place where the questions that still matter, the questions about what a good life looks like and what the gods are and what justice requires, were first asked with enough rigor to produce answers worth taking seriously. There is an Athenian philosopher, an elderly man, by the time Hadrian comes to Athens, who has spent his life in the schools that have been operating in this city since Plato. He has taught students from across the empire. He has watched Rome become the political fact of the Mediterranean world. He has thought carefully about what it means that the people who now govern the world he lives in are not the people who created the intellectual tradition he inhabits. When Hadrian comes to Athens and asks to be initiated into the mysteries, and funds the completion of the temple, and builds a library, and walks through the ancient city with the evident attention of someone who knows what he is looking at, this philosopher watches. He has seen Roman officials in Athens before. He knows what Roman attention to Greek culture usually looks like. It looks like acquisition, like a man admiring your furniture and calculating what it would cost to move it to his house. Hadrian looks different. He looks like a man who understands. at a level that goes past aesthetic appreciation into something more fundamental. That this city is not a beautiful artifact of a dead civilization. It is a living argument about how to be human. And the argument is still going. And he wants to be part of it. The philosopher is not entirely sure what to do with this. He has, in his long life, become accustomed to the idea that power and wisdom do not often occupy the same person. The qualities that help a person accumulate power are not the same qualities that help a person understand what power is for. Hadrian is something he does not quite have a category for. He is the most powerful man in the world. He is also, by any honest assessment, one of the better-read men in the empire, with a genuine relationship to Greek philosophy that is not the relationship of a dilettante, but the relationship of someone who has spent time with the primary texts and thought seriously about what they say. Can both things be true at once? The philosopher thinks about this for a long time. He does not fully resolve it. But here is the question that Hadrian's presence in Athens forces, the question that his love for Greek culture makes unavoidable. When the most powerful man in the world loves a culture and wants to preserve it and invests in it and participates in its rituals, what is he actually doing? Is it love? Is it the most sophisticated form of possession? The kind where you do not take the thing but make the thing dependent on your continued generosity? Is it both at once? In the way that things can be both at once, when the person doing them is powerful enough that their intentions and their effects are not the same thing. Hadrian leaves, Athens having been initiated, having funded the temple, having built a library, having walked the streets with the obvious pleasure of someone returning to a place that means something to them. The city is better for his attention. The buildings he funded are real. The temple he completed stands, and Athens is also, now, more clearly and more formally, within the orbit of a man who loves it, which is different from being free. He leaves Greece and continues east. He lets the beard grow longer. He is wearing it now, in the full Greek style. The beard that no emperor before him wore, and that every emperor after him will wear for the next 150 years. Because when the most powerful man in the world decides to look a certain way, the men who want to be like him decide they want to look that way too. He started a fashion. He also started a conversation about what Rome was supposed to become. The beard is gone now, 2,000 years later. The question is not Rome. Sometime in the early years of Hadrian's reign, there is a hole in the roof. That is the first thing you notice when you walk into the Pantheon. Not the columns, not the enormous bronze doors that have been opening and closing on the same hinges for 2,000 years. Not the perfect geometry of the rotunda, the way the diameter exactly equals the height, the way a sphere of precise proportions could be inscribed inside the space and touch every surface at once. The whole, it is 27 feet across, a perfect circle cut into the top of the dome, open to whatever the sky is doing. When it rains, the rain comes in. There is a drainage system in the floor to handle this. A practical solution to what is essentially a philosophical decision. When the sun is out, a column of light descends through the opening and moves across the interior over the course of the day, touching the walls, the floor, the niches where the gods stand, moving with the slow certainty of something that has been doing this every day for 2,000 years and intends to continue. The whole was a choice. There was no engineering reason. It had to be open. The Romans knew how to cover an opening that size. They had the materials and the skill. Closing the oculus would have been simpler in many ways, would have made the interior drier and more controllable, and more like every other enclosed space in the empire. Hadrian left it open. The building's name is Pantheon. It means, roughly, of all the gods. It was not the first building on this site with that name. Agrippa built a Pantheon in the same location during the reign of Augustus. And it burned, and what replaced it burned too. And what Hadrian built is the third version, completed sometime in the 120s. He kept Agrippa's name on the inscription above the entrance, which is either unusual humility for a Roman emperor or a sophisticated understanding that some things are bigger than the individual who builds them. The building is designed to contain every divine order simultaneously. There are niches for gods around the circumference. Not one god, many gods. The whole cosmological community of divine figures that the Roman world had accumulated over centuries of absorbing foreign pantheons and incorporating them into an ever-expanding theological inventory. Jupiter and Juno and Mars alongside Isis and Serapis, and whatever local deity a provincial city had brought into the Roman system, along with its tax obligations. They all fit. The dome above them holds them all equally under a pattern of coffers that diminishes toward the oculus in perfect mathematical proportion, drawing the eye upward toward the open circle and the sky beyond it, toward whatever is actually out there. There is a stonemason who works on the interior finishing of the Pantheon, a craftsman from somewhere in Italy, whose name does not appear in any record because craftsmen of his status did not generate the kind of documentation that survives 2,000 years. He is skilled in the specific way that men are skilled when they have spent 20 years doing one thing with full attention. When the work has moved from learned to instinctive to something that operates below the level of conscious thought, he is working on the coffered ceiling of the dome, the recessed rectangular panels that cover the interior surface in a grid that becomes more compressed as it approaches the top. This is precise work. The geometry has to be exact. The proportions have to maintain themselves across a curved surface in a way that looks inevitable rather than calculated, which means the calculation behind it has to be flawless. He does the calculation. He does the work. One afternoon he is up near the top of the scaffolding and he looks down through the interior of the dome to the floor far below. And the light from the oculus is coming in at the angle it comes in at this hour of this day, and it is doing something to the space that he has not quite seen before from this vantage point. It is filling the rotunda from the inside, not illuminating it in the way that torches or windows illuminate an interior, pushing light from a source outward against surfaces, filling it, the way a vessel fills with water. From above, the light descending and diffusing and touching every surface with the same quality of attention. He stays still for a moment. He is not a philosophical man in the formal sense. He does not read Plato. He has not been initiated into any mysteries. He is a craftsman, and his relationship to the divine is the practical relationship of someone who knows that the gods are real, because the evidence for their reality is all around him, and he has never had occasion to question it. But something about the view from the top of that scaffolding, looking down into the light-filled rotunda, produces in him a feeling he does not have a name. He goes back to work. He will finish the coffering. He will move on to the next job. He will die at some point in the next several decades without ever being recorded in any document as having existed, but his hands shaped the surface of a building that is standing right now, today, in Rome, still receiving the same light through the same hole in the same roof, still doing what it was designed to do. Think about what Hadrian is actually building here. He is building a space that makes a specific argument about the divine order. The argument is not the same argument that a temple to Jupiter makes, or a temple to Isis, or any other space designed for a specific theological tradition. Those spaces say this God is here and others are not, or are less, or are accommodated as secondary guests in someone else's house. The Pantheon says something different. It says the divine order is larger than any single account of it. It says, what is above us? What comes through that hole in the roof? What the light is a sign of, is not owned by any one tradition or any one name. It says we can all stand in this room. This is, in the context of the ancient world, a remarkable thing to say in stone. It is also, in the context of Hadrian's reign specifically, a statement that resonates in ways that go beyond architecture. Hadrian is governing an empire that contains within it enormous diversity of religious practice and theological belief. He is governing Egyptians who worship Isis and Osiris. He is governing Eastern populations with their own ancient traditions. He is governing a growing community of people who believe in a single God and are in the process of working out what that belief requires of them in relation to the empire that governs them. He cannot, and does not, fully accommodate all of these traditions. He is a Roman emperor, and the empire has its requirements and its official religious life and its expectations of public participation in imperial cult that are not optional for people who want to remain in good standing with the power that governs them. But the Pantheon is a different kind of statement. It is a building that suggests, in the way that buildings suggest things rather than saying them outright, that the man who built it understands the divine is not something Rome owns, that it comes through the roof and belongs to everyone who stands underneath it. Hadrian never explains the Pantheon in writing. He does not leave a philosophical treatise about what it means. He builds it and leaves it standing, and the standing is the explanation. 2,000 years later, it is still the best preserved ancient building in Rome. Arguably the world, for the specific reason that it became a Christian church in the 7th century and was therefore maintained and protected through the medieval period, when most other Roman buildings were being stripped for materials. The building designed to hold all the gods was preserved by people who believed in only one. He would have found that interesting. Whether he would have found it satisfying is a different question. The light moves through the oculus in the same arc it has always moved through, at the same hours, touching the same surfaces. The rain comes in when it rains. The floor drains it away. The gods stand in their niches, and the space above them holds the sky, and 27 feet of open circle connects the inside of the building to whatever is out there. Still open, still receiving, still the same question Hadrian asked in stone, what is it? Exactly, that we are all standing under. The building keeps asking. Nobody has answered it yet. Before Antinous, there is Vibia, Sabina. She deserves a moment before we move past her, because history has not given her many moments, and the ones it has given her are almost entirely defined by her relationship to a man who did not love her. She was the grandniece of Trajan. She married Hadrian when she was around 14, which was not unusual for Roman women of her class, and the marriage was arranged, which was also not unusual, and the arrangement was political, which was not unusual either. It connected Hadrian more firmly to Trajan's family at a moment when that connection was useful to him. She was intelligent. The ancient sources that mention her at all describe a woman of real capability, and the portraits that survive show a face with a specific quality of attention in it, the look of someone who is observing carefully and not revealing what she makes of what she sees. She observed her husband carefully for 30 years. What she made of what she saw, she kept to herself. The marriage was not happy in any way that the sources record as happiness. Hadrian was cold toward her. By his own apparent acknowledgement, and by the accounts of people who watched them together, he did not abuse her. He did not demote her, or remove her titles, or treat her as anything other than the empress consort. He simply did not love her. And 30 years of not being loved by someone you are required to stand next to at every official occasion is its own category of difficulty. There is a woman in the imperial household, one of Sabina's attendant, who has spent years in close proximity to the empress and has developed the particular understanding that proximity produces, an understanding that is not knowledge exactly, but is more than observation, the accumulated reading of small signals and silences, and the specific way a person holds themselves when they have accepted something they cannot change. She watches Sabina watch Hadrian. She watches Hadrian not watch Sabina. She does her job, and she keeps her opinions to herself, because that is what you do when your opinions concern the most powerful people in the world. And then Antinous arrives. The exact circumstances of his arrival are not recorded with the precision that would settle the question of how it happened. He was from Bithynia, a province in northwestern Asia Minor, a region deeply Hellenized, Greek in culture and language in the way that the Eastern Mediterranean had become Greek through Alexander's conquests and had remained Greek through every subsequent political change. He was young, probably around 13 or 14, when he first appears in Hadrian's circle. On the eastern tour of 123, or thereabouts, he was beautiful in the specific way that the ancient world preserved for us in the hundreds of portraits that Hadrian would later commission. A face that is simultaneously young and composed, with the quality of someone who has not yet decided what they are going to become, and is therefore still capable of becoming almost anything. What he became was the most portrayed individual in the ancient world who was not an emperor. But that comes after, before. He is a boy from Bithynia in an emperor's entourage, and something about his presence changes the quality of Hadrian's attention in ways that the people around the emperor notice before any of them say anything about it. The attendant in the imperial household notices this, the way she notices everything. Quietly, and without making it her business. She has watched the emperor for years. She knows how he moves through a room, what he pays attention to, where his eyes go when he is not performing the official role. She has seen him genuinely engaged in conversations about philosophy and architecture and the state of the frontier. She has seen him politely present at ceremonies and dinners where his mind is elsewhere. She has not seen what she sees now. She sees him look at Antinous the way you look at something you did not expect to find. This requires care to discuss, because the modern world and the ancient world do not share the same categories for what this relationship was. The Roman world had its own understandings of desire and hierarchy, and what was acceptable between an older man of power and a younger person of lower status. Understandings that are not the same as ours, that we cannot simply adopt because they are ancient, and cannot simply dismiss because they are inconvenient. What we can say is this: something real happened between Hadrian and Antinous. It lasted for approximately 7 years. From whenever Antinous joined the imperial entourage until his death in Egypt in 130, it was known. It was visible. It was not hidden in the way that things are hidden when the person hiding them is ashamed of them. The ancient sources that discuss it range from neutral to respectful to critical, but none of them suggest Hadrian was trying to conceal it. What we can also say is that its public character tells us something about Hadrian specifically. He had grown up in Greek culture. In the Greek tradition, particularly the older Athenian tradition he had studied, There was a well-established framework for a relationship between an older man and a younger one, a framework that involved mentorship and admiration and a kind of love that was understood as having both intellectual and personal dimensions. He would have known this framework. He would have understood his own experience, partly through it. But the framework does not exhaust what was happening. What was happening, as far as we can reconstruct it across the distance of 20 centuries, is that a man who had spent his entire adult life managing, controlling, organizing, drawing lines around things, had encountered someone who made him feel something he could not manage. He had put a boundary around the empire. He had put a boundary around Britain. He had put a boundary around the question of his own legitimacy. He was in the process of putting a boundary around Greek culture by funding it and patronizing it and making himself its imperial protector. He could not put a boundary around this. Antinous traveled with the imperial entourage for years. He appears in reliefs and inscriptions from various provinces, always in the background of the official record, never in the foreground, because he held no official title, and the official record did not have a category for what he was. He was simply there, and Hadrian, wherever he went, was different when he was there. The attendant in Sabina's household watches all of this over years and develops a theory she does not share with anyone. It is not a theory about the relationship itself. It is a theory about what the relationship reveals. She has watched powerful people her whole life. She has seen what power does to people who have too much of it for too long. She has seen how it narrows them, how it makes them smaller in certain ways, even as it makes them larger in others, how it closes off the parts of a person that do not fit the role requires. Hadrian is the most powerful person she has ever been near, and yet when Antinous is in the room, something in Hadrian opens that she has not seen open before. She does not have a word for this in the vocabulary her world has given her. She just watches it. She does not know yet what it will cost. Nobody does. The entourage is in Egypt in the autumn of 130. The imperial tour is moving through the eastern provinces with the thoroughness that characterizes all of Hadrian's travels, seeing and assessing and being present in the way he has made his signature. They are on the Nile. The Nile in autumn has its own specific quality. The flood has receded. The fields along the banks are the deep black of Nile silt, just deposited, and the contrast between that black and the desert beyond it is one of the most striking visual facts in the ancient world. The absolute line between life and death that the river draws every year and has been drawing for as long as anyone has been alive to see it. Antinous is 20, or 19, or perhaps not quite 20. The sources do not agree on his exact age, as they do not agree on much about him. He is on the river, and then he is not. The Nile, October, 130. The body is found in the water. That is the fact. That is the whole of what is certain. Antinous went into the Nile and did not come out alive. And the man who pulled him from the water is not named in any surviving record, because he was not the kind of person records named. He was probably a local man, an Egyptian who lived near the river, the way Egyptians have always lived near the river, organized around it, dependent on it, familiar with it in the deep, practical way of people whose survival has been connected to a body of water for so many generations that the connection feels less like a relationship and more like a fact of nature. He knew the Nile. He knew what the Nile did to things that went into it and did not come back out immediately. He knew the current patterns in this stretch of river. He knew the way the water moved at this time of year, after the flood had peaked and was beginning its long recession, the way it was still carrying the energy of the inundation even as it pulled back toward its banks. He found a young man in the water. He did what you do when you find someone in the water. He called for help. Other people came. The body was brought to shore. He did not know who this was. He saw a young man, foreign by his look, well dressed in the way that members of imperial entourages are well dressed, even when traveling, dead in the way that people are dead when the water has finished with them. He stepped back when the people from the emperor's party arrived. He watched from a distance as the situation on the riverbank became something he had no framework for. The Emperor of Rome was there. The Emperor of Rome was not behaving the way the Emperor of Rome was supposed to behave. That is all the Egyptian man understood. Watching from the distance of someone who has done what he could do and now has no further role. He did not speak Greek or Latin. The words being spoken on the riverbank were not his words. The grief being expressed on that bank was not a grief he had the context to interpret. He stayed until it was clear no one needed him anymore. Then he went home. He had a life to return to, fields to tend, a family to feed, the Nile to live alongside in the way he had always lived alongside it, in the relationship of absolute dependency that the river demands, and that the people of Egypt have been offering it since before any empire existed to govern them. He did not think about the young man in the water after that, or not often. People died in the Nile. It was not a gentle river. It was a necessary river, which is a different thing. He went home. On the riverbank, something was happening that he could not have understood, and that history has not been able to fully explain, even with 2,000 years of trying. What happened to Antinous in the Nile is not known. The ancient sources offer several possibilities: an accident, a suicide, a ritual sacrifice, voluntary or not, connected to Egyptian religious practice, and the belief that a young man who drowned in the Nile at the right moment might transfer his remaining years of life to someone else. The sources do not agree. Modern scholars do not agree. The question is open and is likely to remain open. What is not open is what happened to Hadrian when he was told. The official record moves quickly from the death to the official response. The deification, the founding of the city, the commissioning of portraits. It is the record of an emperor organizing his grief into institutional action, converting loss into program, doing what emperors do when the world requires them to act rather than feel. But before the official response, there was a night. There was a night on the banks of the Nile when Hadrian was not yet organizing anything, when the machinery of imperial response had not yet started turning, when he was just a man who had been told something and had not yet found a way to stand up straight under the weight of it. He is alone. The people around him have given him space, the way people give space to someone when the situation exceeds what presence can help. They are near enough to be available. They are far enough to understand that available is not the same as needed right now. He is looking at the river. The Nile at night is a different thing from the Nile in daylight. In daylight, it is a working fact of the world. The thing that makes this landscape possible. The engine of the civilization built on its banks. At night, it is something older. Something that was here before any of the names that have been given to it, and will be here after the last of those names is forgotten. It moves in the dark with the patience of something that does not measure time in human increments. He has governed this river. This river is part of the empire he governs, which means that in the formal sense of the word, he is responsible for it. Its flooding schedule concerns his tax revenue. Its navigation concerns his military logistics. The welfare of the people who live alongside it concerns his administrative apparatus. The river does not know this. He has spent 20 years in the position of the man who makes decisions. the man at the center of the machine who converts problems into solutions and situations into policy and the endless arriving complexity of governing 60 million people into an ordered sequence of responses. He has been good at this, better than almost anyone who has held this position before him. He has not had a problem he could not eventually convert into a response. He is standing at the river, and he is understanding, in his body rather than his mind, that this is the problem that does not convert. There is no response to this. There is no administrative solution. There is no decision that addresses what has happened. There is no border to draw around it. No name to give it that changes what it is. No building to construct that fills the specific shape of the absence. He has governed everything. He cannot govern this. He does not weep immediately. The immediate response is something more like the stillness that comes when the mind encounters something too large to process and simply stops. The way you stop moving when you walk into a dark room and cannot see where the walls are. He stands at the river. He stands there for a long time. And then something shifts. The way things shift, when the stillness has gone on long enough that the body decides it cannot maintain it anymore. And what comes out of him is not the controlled grief of a man who is managing the situation. It is the sound that comes out of people when they have lost something, and the loss is real, and there is no version of this that is not the loss. The ancient sources say he wept like a woman. This was meant as criticism. In the Roman world of the 2nd century, the emperor weeping openly and extensively over the death of a companion was not behavior that fit the expected role. Emperors were supposed to receive bad news with the controlled response that indicated the news had been absorbed and processed and translated into appropriate action. Hadrian did not do that. He wept, and the criticism embedded in how the sources describe this, the comparison to women, the implication that this was excessive and not what an emperor of Rome should look like when something terrible happened, tells us something important about what was being witnessed. What was being witnessed was the most powerful man in the world at the one boundary he could not draw. He has spent his reign defining where things end. He defined where Rome ends in Britain. He defined where Roman expansion ends in Mesopotamia. He has been, in the deepest sense of the word, a man who draws lines. He is standing at a line he did not draw and cannot erase and cannot move and cannot administer away. It is just there. The river moves past him in the dark, carrying whatever the river carries, indifferent to the man standing on its bank and the size of what he has just lost. He stays there until the sky begins to change in the east. The way the sky changes before dawn. The darkness becoming a specific shade of blue that is not quite light, but is the announcement that light is coming. He watches it come. He is already thinking about what he is going to do, not because the grief has passed. It has not passed. It will not pass. He will carry this for the rest of his life, and the rest of his life will be organized around it in ways he is only beginning to understand. But he is Hadrian. He has spent 40 years learning that the response to what cannot be controlled is to build, to make permanent, to convert the formless thing into a form that can be held, looked at, pointed to. He cannot bring Antinous back from the Nile, but he can fill the world with the face. By the time the sun is fully up and the people around him begin to move toward him carefully, the way people move towards someone who has been through the night and come out the other side. He has already started. The official response begins. Antinous is declared a god. A city will be built at the place where he died. Portraits will be commissioned. A constellation will be named. The machinery of imperial power turns toward grief and begins to convert it into stone and bronze and the permanent record of a face that will not be allowed to disappear. This is what he has. This is what he knows how to do. He does it, and somewhere, in all the doing, in the months and years of building and commissioning and naming, the grief does not diminish, but it finds a shape that can be lived with, a shape that is still there every morning when he wakes up, but has the weight of something acknowledged rather than something fought. He could not draw a line around grief, so he made grief the boundary, the fixed point in the center of the remaining years of his reign, the thing that was there before the administrative decisions, and there after them, and there during them. There is more surviving portrait sculpture of Antinous than of almost any individual from the ancient world who was not an emperor. The British Museum has one, the Vatican museums have several, the National Archaeological Museum in Athens has one, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo has one. They are in Florence and Naples and Istanbul, and scattered across the former territory of the empire that commissioned them. Scholars who have catalogued the surviving works count them in the hundreds when you include fragments, reliefs, and coins. Every one of them shows the same face, full lips, heavy-lidded eyes, an expression that sits in the territory between contemplation and something else. Something that the people who study these portraits tend to describe with words like yearning, or looking, or almost arriving at something just out of reach. Here is the thing that you understand only when you stand in front of one of these portraits and look at it for longer than a quick museum visit usually permits. The face is not Antinous. It is Hadrian looking at Antinous. Every portrait is a record of the person who commissioned it as much as the person depicted. The choice of expression, the quality of attention the sculptor was asked to capture, the specific emotional register that hundreds of craftsmen working from imperial direction converged on. All of it reflects not just what Antinous looked like, but what Hadrian needed the world to see when it looked at him. And what Hadrian needed the world to see was longing, not grief, exactly, though grief is inside it, not mourning, which implies a process moving towards some resolution, longing, the specific look of someone directed towards something that cannot be reached, something just past the edge of the visible. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he had the resources to commission any expression he wanted, and he chose this one. He chose the face of someone looking at something they cannot have. That is what he felt every morning when he woke up for the rest of his life. He made that feeling into stone and put it in every city he could reach. There is a woman in the city of Antinopolis who was there before the city was there. She was in a village on this part of the Nile bank when it was a village and not a city, when it had no Greek name and no Greek institutions and no temple to a drowned young man from Bithynia. Then the emperor came through. Then the young man died. Then the city arrived with the efficiency of an imperial construction program that knows how to build things and has decided to build them here. She stayed. She had nowhere else to go. She passes the temple on her way to the market every day. The face of Antinous looks out from the stone in the expression that has become the official expression, the one that the portrait tradition has settled on across hundreds of versions in dozens of cities. She looks at it each time she passes. She has her own gods. The ancient Egyptian divine order that has been organizing the world she lives in since before Rome and before Greece and before anyone thought to build a city around one man's drowning. She does not worship Antinous, but she looks at the face, and what she sees in it, what anyone who looks at it long enough tends to see, is not a god. It is someone who lost something. The cult of Antinous spreads faster and wider than a purely imposed imperial mandate would explain. Official cults decreed by emperors can achieve formal compliance without achieving genuine religious feeling. People make the required gestures. They do not feel anything they were not already feeling before the requirement was imposed. The cult of Antinous is different. The difference is the face. Imperial portraits are assertions of power. They say, "This person rules you." The portraits of Antinous say something that is harder to categorize. They say this person was loved, and grief, it turns out, has a universality that power does not. People who have never met an emperor, who will never meet an emperor, who experience the empire as a distant weight of taxation and obligation, those people understand grief. They know what it looks like to lose someone. They know what it looks like when someone will not let go. The cult spreads because the face is recognizable. Not as Antinous. Most people who encountered the portrait had no idea who Antinous had been in his actual life. They recognized something in the expression. They recognized loss. They built shrines. They made offerings. They participated in the games at Antinopolis, where athletes competed in honor of a young man who had drowned in the river. The games were held beside. The woman who was there before the city was there passes the temple on her way home from the market. She looks at the face. She goes home. She takes care of the people she takes care of and lives the life she lives, which is not in any official record and will not be remembered by anyone past 2 generations. The face in the temple will be looked at for 2,000 years. She passes it every day. Neither of them chose this, but here is what the face tells us. Across the distance of 20 centuries and the museums it has ended up in, Hadrian drew the borders of the known world. He drew them in stone in Britain, and in administrative decisions in Mesopotamia, and in the architectural argument of the Pantheon, and in the careful management of his own political legitimacy from the moment the adoption document was produced in Cilicia. He could not draw one around grief, so he did the only thing left to do. He made the grief visible. He made it stone. He made it the face of someone looking at something just past the visible, pointing at the one boundary that no emperor had ever been able to draw, the boundary between the living and the dead, the boundary between the person who was there and the silence that replaced them. He made it permanent, and permanent, as it turns out, was the one thing he was always going to be good at. The face is still there, still looking, still pointing at something we cannot see. Judea, the year 130, the same year Antinous dies in the Nile. Hadrian visits Jerusalem, or what is left of it. What is left of it is not much. 60 years earlier, in the year 70, the Roman general Titus brought 4 legions against the city during a Jewish revolt, and the result was one of the most complete destructions in the ancient world. The temple, the Second Temple, the center of Jewish religious life and the physical location where, in Jewish theology, the divine presence met the human world, was burned. The city was broken. The population was killed or enslaved or scattered in numbers that the people doing the documenting were not inclined to record with precision because they were the people doing the killing. The city Hadrian walks through in 130 is a ruin managing to function as a settlement. It has residents. It has a small Roman garrison. It has the basic infrastructure of a provincial town that has been slowly rebuilding in the decades since the destruction, but it has the quality of a place that is still deciding what it is. A place whose previous identity was destroyed thoroughly enough that the question of what comes next has not been fully answered. Hadrian looks at it and sees an answer. He is going to build a Roman city here. He will call it Aelia Capitolina. Aelia from his own family name. Capitolina from the Capitoline Hill in Rome, the seat of Jupiter, the symbolic center of Roman divine order. He will lay it out on the Roman grid, streets at right angles, forums and baths, and the architecture of a functioning Roman provincial city, and somewhere in the design, a temple to the Roman gods on or near the ground that Jewish memory identifies as the most sacred in the world. Hadrian has a logic for this. It is not a careless logic. It is the logic he has applied everywhere he has governed. Rome organizes. Rome provides the framework within which all the different peoples of the empire can coexist under a shared civic identity. The local traditions do not have to disappear. They become part of the larger whole. The Egyptian in Antinopolis does not stop being Egyptian. The Greek in Athens does not stop being Greek. They become also Roman, which is not a replacement of what they were, but an addition to it. A shared layer of civic identity that holds the whole thing together. This logic has worked in a lot of places. It has worked in places where the local identity does not have, at its center, something that cannot be shared. Hadrian has spent his reign learning to love difference. He completed the temple in Athens that had been unfinished for 600 years. He built the Pantheon to hold all the gods simultaneously. He walked into the Eleusinian mysteries as a Roman emperor and asked to belong. He named a city after his grief. He has demonstrated, in stone and in policy, and in the specific quality of his attention across 3 decades, that he understands that the world is larger than the Roman account of it. He is about to demonstrate that understanding has a limit. The limit is this. He can love cultures that understand themselves as available to everyone, cultures that say their truth is open, that their traditions can be adopted, that their beauty can be shared with whoever wants to participate in it. Athens was like that. Egypt was like that, with its ancient mysteries and its divine order that had absorbed and been absorbed by so many foreign influences that one more was not a contradiction. He cannot fully accommodate a tradition that understands its covenant as specific and exclusive, a promise made to one people in one place that is not transferable to the Roman synthesis without ceasing to be itself. He does not understand this yet. He gives the order. Construction begins on Aelia Capitolina. There is a man in Jerusalem in 130 who reads the plans when they become known. He is not an impulsive man. He has not survived this long in this situation by being impulsive. He understands power and what it can do, and he has spent his life navigating carefully around the things it can do. He reads the plans. He sits with what he has read for a long time. What he is reading is not a military threat. It is something that in some ways is harder to respond to than a military threat. It is the announcement that the ground on which the most important things in his world happened is going to be renamed and repurposed and given a new identity that belongs to someone else's theology. It is Rome saying what you think this place is not what this place is. It is Rome saying we decide what things mean. He has heard Rome say this about many things. He has not heard it said about this. In 132, Simon Bar Kosiba rises. He is not called Bar Kosiba by the people who follow him. He is called Bar Kok Bar, son of a star. The reference is to a verse in the book of Numbers. A star shall rise from Jacob, which certain rabbis in this period interpret as a prophecy about the Messiah. Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest Jewish scholars of the ancient world, looks at Simon Bar Kosiba and says, "This is the one." Think about what that means in context. The Jewish people have been living without their temple for 60 years. They have been living under Roman rule in their own land as a subject population for nearly 200 years. They have watched Jerusalem destroyed. They have watched the religious and civic center of their world burned and the population scattered. They have rebuilt, in the extraordinary way that the rabbis rebuilt Jewish religious life around the study of Torah and the practice of law in the absence of the temple. But underneath the rebuilding, the wound is still there, and now Rome is building a pagan city on the ground the wound comes from. Simon Bar Kokhba rises with military organization that surprises Rome. He secures supply lines. He coordinates across communities. He issues coins. The coins say things like, Year 1 of the redemption of Israel and Year 2 of the freedom of Israel. Year 1 of the redemption. He is not raising an army. He is inaugurating a new era. There is a young man from a village near Jericho who joins the revolt in its early months. He is not a soldier. He is a farmer's son who has grown up in a community living in the long shadow of the destruction of 70, who has learned the prayers and the law and the stories and the understanding of what his people are and what they are owed, by history and by God. He joins because of the coins. Year 1 of the redemption of Israel. He holds a coin in his hand and reads that, and it does something to him that nothing else has done in his 20 years of living in a province that Rome governs, and that bears almost no resemblance to the place his prayers describe. When they speak of home, he takes up a weapon. He does not think carefully about the Roman military capacity he is placing himself in opposition to. He is 20 years old and he has spent his whole life being told that something was promised and that the promise has not yet been fulfilled and that the fulfillment is coming. The coin in his hand says Year 1. He goes. The revolt initially succeeds in ways that shock Rome. Simon Bar Kokhba's forces take and hold significant territory. Roman forces suffer real losses. The governor of Judea is killed. Hadrian has to bring in his best general, Julius Severus, from Britain, pulling a commander from one end of the empire to deal with a crisis at the other. 4 legions. Hadrian ultimately commits the equivalent of 4 full legions to the suppression of this revolt, plus supporting forces. This is not the response to a minor disturbance. This is the response to something that has become a genuine military emergency, the kind that requires the full deployment of Roman military capacity. Julius Severus does not seek pitched battles, where Bar Kokhba's knowledge of the terrain and the commitment of his fighters would be advantages. He conducts a systematic campaign of attrition, cutting off supply lines, reducing strongholds one by one, denying the revolt the conditions it needs to sustain itself. It takes 3 years. 3 years of a war that the Roman sources are unusually reluctant to describe in detail, which is itself a kind of evidence. Roman military history celebrates Roman victories. The Dacian campaigns have Trajan's column, a 100-foot monument of carved stone describing every stage of the war. The Bar Kokhba War does not have a column. It does not have the triumphal literature that Roman victories typically generate. The silence in the Roman sources is a shape, the shape of something that even Rome found difficult to present as a straightforward triumph. The numbers are what they are. The ancient sources give figures that historians approach with appropriate caution, but the scale of what happened is not in serious doubt. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Villages were destroyed. Communities that had existed for centuries did not exist afterward. The young man from near Jericho fights for 3 years. He fights because there is nothing else to do once you have started. The logic of the revolt, once committed to, does not have a comfortable exit. You fight or you surrender, and surrender means returning to the world as it was, except worse, because Rome does not forgive revolts. Better falls in 135. Bar Kokhba is killed in the siege. Rabbi Akiva is executed by the Romans afterward. The manner of his death, as preserved in Jewish sources, is described with the specific detail of something that was witnessed and remembered because it mattered. He died reciting the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The words he said with his last breath were not a defiance of Rome. They were a statement about where his loyalty had always been and would always be. After the suppression, Hadrian issues his orders. Judea is renamed Syria Palestina. The name Judea does not appear on Roman maps from this point forward. Jerusalem becomes Aelia Capitolina. Jewish people are forbidden to enter it. The penalty for entering is death. There is an exception for 1 day a year, when Jews are permitted to come to the ruins of the temple to mourn its destruction. The image of a community paying to mourn their own loss in a city they are not allowed to live in is one that the ancient sources preserve without apparently noticing how it sounds. Circumcision is banned. The transmission of Jewish identity across generations is targeted directly. Hadrian is doing these things from the same logic that built the wall in Britain and the Pantheon in Rome and the city of Antinopolis on the Nile. He is drawing lines. He is deciding what things are and enforcing that decision with the full weight of imperial authority. He is applying the tool that has defined his entire reign to a problem that the tool is not designed for. The tool works on stone. It does not work on what a people carry inside them. He is the same man who completed the temple in Athens that had been unfinished for 600 years. He is the same man who walked into the Eleusinian mysteries and asked to belong. He is the same man who built a building in Rome with a hole in the roof and said through the architecture that what is above us belongs to everyone. He is also the man who signed these orders. Both things are true. The wall in Britain is still drawing the line he drew. The Pantheon is still receiving the rain, and the name Judea, the name he removed from every official Roman map, survived in every prayer and every document and every reference to the land that was carried in the hearts of a people who had decided that dispersal was not the end of the story, but a chapter in it. He drew a line through the name. The name outlived the line. The young man from near Jericho is not in any document. He probably dies. Or he lives as a fugitive in a landscape, being converted into something Rome can govern, carrying with him the coin that said, Year 1 of the redemption of Israel, and the knowledge that the year 1 it promised did not come. He is not recorded, but somewhere in the hills of what Rome was calling Syria Palestina, in the years after Beta fell, a group of people took shelter in a cave and brought with them what they could carry: documents, letters, the legal papers of their ordinary lives. They placed them in the dry dark and they did not come back for them. In 1960, archaeologists found those papers. They were still there, perfectly preserved by the desert air. The papers of a woman named Babatha, the record of her property disputes and her marriage arrangements and the ordinary financial life of a person in Roman Judea, ending in 132, the year the revolt began. She took them into the cave. She did not come back. The papers are in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem today. In a city that Hadrian tried to rename, the city kept its name. The papers survived. That is the answer to the question Hadrian's orders were asking. The question of whether an empire can rename a place and have the renaming stick. It can put the new name on maps. It cannot put it in the hearts of the people who know what the place actually is. There is a specific kind of power that Hadrian never fully understood. He understood stone. He understood the power of a wall that stands in a landscape for 20 centuries and says to everyone who looks at it, "This is where we decided the world ends." He understood the power of a building with a hole in its roof that says, "What is above us is larger than any name we give it." He understood the power of a face repeated hundreds of times across an empire that says, "This person was loved." And the loving will not be permitted to disappear. He understood how to make things permanent in space. What he did not fully understand is how to make things permanent in time. The rabbis understood this. In the years after the Bar Kokhba War, in the communities that had survived the destruction and were rebuilding their religious and communal life in the ruins of what the revolt had cost them, a group of scholars made a decision that is one of the most consequential in the history of civilization. They decided to write it down, not the military details of the revolt or the administrative facts of the occupation. Those things were being written down by Rome. In the official record that Rome controlled, the rabbis wrote down something else. They wrote down the practice, the law, the accumulated oral tradition of how to live as a Jewish person in a world that did not make that easy and had recently made it extraordinarily dangerous. The project that begins in these years will eventually become the Mishnah, completed around the year 200 under Rabbi Judah the Prince. It will be followed by the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, which will become the central texts of Jewish learning and practice for the next 2,000 years. There is a scholar in one of the Jewish communities of the diaspora, working in the years after the revolt, doing the patient work of collecting and organizing the tradition that needs to be preserved. He does not know what the collection will eventually become. He is doing the work that is in front of him. He is copying a text. It is a legal commentary concerning the proper observance of a festival, the specific requirements of a ritual, the correct way to perform an act of religious practice that has been performed for centuries and will be performed for centuries more. He copies it carefully. He passes it to someone else. They copy it. The chain continues. What makes this different from stone is everything. These texts are not stored in a building. They can be copied. They can be translated. They can be learned by heart and held inside a person who carries them across any border that Rome draws or any emperor names or any army enforces. They require no specific geography to exist. They do not need Jerusalem to function as Jerusalem. They are Jerusalem made portable. Hadrian built walls. The rabbis built something that walls cannot touch. He understood that places held memory. He had spent his reign demonstrating this understanding. Through the wall that held the memory of where Rome decided to stop, through the Pantheon that held the memory of a civilization's relationship with the divine, through Antinopolis that held the memory of a young man who drowned in a river. He understood that places were memory made physical. What he did not understand is that the rabbis had already solved the problem of what to do when the place is taken from you. You carry the memory in practice instead. You build it into the structure of time rather than the structure of space. You make the calendar itself a monument. The 9th of Av, the fast day that commemorates the destruction of the temple. It falls on the same date every year in the Jewish calendar, observed as a day of mourning since the destruction of the first temple in 586 before the Common Era, through the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 of the Common Era, through every subsequent catastrophe that has befallen the Jewish people in the 2,000 years since. It is a day. It cannot be renamed. It cannot be demolished. It cannot be converted into anything else by any power that wishes to repurpose it. It comes back every year. Rome put the new name on the maps. The old name survived in every text, copied in every community, across every generation, for 2,000 years. It survived into the name of a modern nation-state. It survived Hadrian. It survived Rome. It is still there. In the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, the papers of Babatha are displayed behind glass. Legal documents, the mundane paperwork of a life that ended when she took her papers into a cave in 132 and did not come back for them. They are in a city that kept its name. They are evidence of a life that Rome's maps tried to make impossible. They are still here. Hadrian drew lines in stone across the landscape of the known world. The lines in stone weathered. The lines in practice did not. That is the specific thing about memory encoded into practice rather than place. It does not need good weather to survive. It does not need an emperor's continued endorsement. It does not need anything except people willing to do the work of transmission. One generation handing the practice to the next, year after year, in the specific, unglamorous act of continuation that looks, from the outside, like nothing much, and turns out to be everything. Hadrian built walls. The walls are tourist attractions. The practice is still practiced. Tivoli, Italy. The years 134 through 138. There is a villa in the hills east of Rome that is not quite a villa. It is too large to be a villa. It covers roughly 120 acres and contains within it a theatre, multiple bath complexes, libraries, dining halls, a private island accessible only by a retractable bridge, gardens organized according to principles that reflect the thinking of a man who has spent years considering what the relationship between order and beauty should look like, and a series of spaces designed to evoke specific places from the emperor's travels across the empire. The Canopus, a long reflecting pool named after a canal near Alexandria in Egypt, lined with sculptures, designed to hold inside it the quality of light and water that Hadrian encountered on the Nile. The Poikile, a large, rectangular space named after a famous painted stoa in Athens, where philosophers walked and talked and thought. The Academy, named after the place outside Athens where Plato taught. Villa Adriana is a map of everywhere Hadrian has been, built in stone and water in the hills of Tivoli. It is also where he comes to die, not all at once. Dying at the scale Hadrian does, it takes years. A long, slow argument between the will that built an empire and the body that built it from. The ancient sources describe a condition, possibly related to the heart, possibly something cardiovascular, that made the last years of his reign a continuous negotiation between what he intended to do and what his body would permit. He is in his early 60s, but 60 in the 2nd century. After 40 years of military service and imperial travel and the sustained physical and mental load of governing the most complex administrative entity the ancient world had ever produced, is a different 60 than the one we might imagine. He is tired in a way that sleep does not fix. There is a man who has served in the imperial household for 20 years, a senior attendant whose responsibilities have expanded over the decades to include the management of Hadrian's personal schedule and the coordination between the emperor's private life and the public functions that the role requires. He has been with Hadrian since before the height of the reign, since the travelling years, since the wall and Athens and Egypt. He has watched Hadrian closely for 20 years. He knows the difference between the man and the emperor, in the way that you know the difference when you have been close enough, long enough to see both. He watches the shift happen in the later years at Villa Adriana. The emperor is still there. The decisions still get made. The correspondence still moves. The administrative machinery of the empire still runs with the efficiency that Hadrian built into it over decades of careful attention. He is still, in the technical sense, governing, but the man who governed by going everywhere, by showing up in frontier camps and Greek cities and Egyptian temples, who built his authority on the physical fact of his presence, the man who walked 30 miles a day in Britain and swam in the Rhine and ate in the camp mess with soldiers who could not believe the emperor was eating with them. That man is in a room in Tivoli, and the room has become the edge of his world. The empire he walked is now delivered to him in reports. He reads them with the same attention he has always brought to reading. His mind has not diminished. The arguments he makes in correspondence from this period are as sharp as anything from the earlier years. The intelligence is intact, but the body is losing the argument. He handles the succession with the methodical care that has characterized everything he has done, his first choice. A man he renames Lucius alias Caesar and adopts formally as his heir, dies in 138 before Hadrian does. The body he chose to carry the empire forward cannot carry it. He finds another, Antoninus, a man of 51, competent and steady, and possessed of the specific quality that Hadrian needs most in a successor at this moment, which is not brilliance, but reliability. The ability to maintain what has been built without needing to rebuild it from scratch. The wisdom to know that the empire he is inheriting works, and that the most valuable thing he can do is keep it working. Hadrian's conditions for the adoption of Antoninus are specific. Antoninus must in turn adopt 2 young men as his own heirs. One of them is Marcus Aurelius, 17 years old at this point, known to Hadrian since he was a small child, who will become 2 reigns from now, the philosopher, emperor, the man who writes the Meditations in a tent on the Danube frontier and wrestles in private with questions about duty and mortality and the difficulty of being good, in a position that makes goodness complicated. The chain of succession Hadrian is constructing reaches forward 2 generations. He is not just choosing his successor, he is choosing his successor's successor. He is doing what he has always done. Planning ahead, thinking in systems, designing the structures that will function after the designer is gone. But there is a difference now. When he designed the wall in Britain, he was designing something that would stand in stone and could be inspected and modified and maintained by anyone who came after. When he reorganized the provincial governance and reformed the administrative structures and professionalized the army's standards, he was designing institutional arrangements that could be adjusted as circumstances required. He is now trying to design human beings. He is choosing the people he believes will carry forward what he has built. And he is doing it with the same systematic attention he has brought to everything. And he knows, at some level, that his intelligence will not let him ignore. That people are not stone. The wall will hold its shape because stone holds its shape. Marcus Aurelius will hold whatever shape his own character and his own choices and the specific pressures of his specific reign produce in him. Hadrian can select him. He cannot design him. This is the limit that all the planning runs into. In Tivoli, in the room that faces the Canopus, the long pool named after the canal near Alexandria where Antinous died, Hadrian sits with what he has built and what he has not. He has built an empire that works better than it did when he inherited it. The administrative structures are more rational. The frontiers are more honestly defined. The relationship between the center and the provinces is more genuinely attentive. The army is more professional. These are real things. They are not nothing. He has not built a version of the empire that does not require everything he put into it. The system he designed runs on the assumption that the person at the top will do what he did, will travel, will inspect, will be genuinely curious about the actual state of things rather than the reported state of things. It runs on attention. He cannot guarantee that the person who comes after him will have that attention. He can choose carefully. He has chosen carefully. He will choose one more time. Carefully. He cannot guarantee anything beyond the choosing. He looks at the canopus. The water is still. It has rained recently and the pool is full, and the sculptures along its edges are reflected in the surface with the doubled quality that still water gives to things. The pool was designed to hold a memory. The memory of Egypt. The memory of the Nile. The memory of the most specific and irreducible loss of his life. It holds water. The memory is in him, not in the pool. This is the thing about building places to hold memories. The places hold the frame. They hold the suggestion. They hold the invitation to remember. But the memory itself lives in the person who carries it. And when the person is gone, the place becomes something else. The canopus will still be here after he is gone. It will not be his canopus. He thinks about the portraits of Antinous still being made, still going up in cities across the empire. The face still looking at something just past the visible. He has not stopped commissioning them. He will commission them until he cannot any more. The face will be there long after he is gone. He thinks about the wall in Britain, which he will never see again, standing in the northern wind, defining the place where he decided Rome ended. He walked that wall once, in the early construction years, in the time when his body was still arguing on his behalf. He will not walk it again. He thinks about the Pantheon, the hole in the roof, the rain coming through somewhere in Rome right now, finding the same floor, draining through the same channels, doing the thing it has always done without his supervision or his presence. The building works without him. That was always the point. He has been trying to build things that work without him. He has mostly succeeded. The thing that does not work without him, cannot work without him, cannot be institutionalized or delegated or designed to continue in his absence, is the specific quality of attention he brought to the empire. The willingness to go, the refusal to govern from a room with a map on the wall when the actual place was available to be walked through. That was not a system. That was him, and it is ending with him. In the later months of his life, Hadrian makes a decision that disturbs the people around him enough that it becomes a story the ancient sources repeat with bewildered attention. He wants to die faster than he is dying. He asks people to help him end it. They refuse. He attempts to obtain a sword. His guards prevent it. He asks his physician to give him something. The physician refuses and kills himself rather than comply, which is either the most extreme form of professional ethics in the ancient world, or a measure of how completely the physician understood that complying was not a real option. The ancient sources tell this story with a quality of sad exasperation, as if they are not quite sure whether to admire the consistency of a man who has spent his whole life refusing to accept limits he found unreasonable, or to mourn the fact that this is how it ends, with the most powerful man in the world, unable to control even the timing of his own exit. He has spent his reign drawing lines. He cannot draw the last one. The attendant who has served him for 20 years sits outside the door of the room where Hadrian sleeps through the afternoons now. The long, uncomfortable sleep of a body that is working very hard at the business of stopping. He has seen powerful people in difficulty before. He has seen the difference between the face a powerful person presents to the world and the face they have when they think no one is watching. He is watching now. He is watching a man who built walls and temples and cities and an administrative system that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, who walked every road worth walking and inspected every frontier worth inspecting, and fell in love once in a way that rearranged the rest of his life, who tried to give Rome an honest account of what it was and what it could sustain, who made terrible choices and consequential ones, and some that were both at once. He is watching that man sleep. The man in the bed is not the emperor right now, just a body doing the difficult work of its final months. A small fact of flesh and breath, and the accumulated weight of 62 years of being alive. The attendant does not know what to do with what he feels. He has spent 20 years in the service of an institution. He has managed that service carefully, maintaining the appropriate distance, keeping his own interior life separate from the professional function. But 20 years is 20 years. He has seen this man clearly. He sits outside the door and does not say anything because there is nothing to say. There is a poem. Hadrian is working on it in the final months. In the intervals between the bad days, when the pain recedes enough to allow the concentration that writing requires. It is short, 4 lines, maybe 5. He has been trying to get it right for weeks. He is writing to his own soul, not to the empire, not to posterity, not to the historians who will write about him, or the senators who will vote on his deification, or the architects who will finish the projects he has started, or the successor he has carefully chosen. To his soul, little wanderer, little charmer, guest and companion of the body. Where are you going now? He does not know. He who knew the geography of the empire better than any person alive, who had walked its roads and inspected its frontiers and built its walls, does not know where this road goes. He looks out at the Canopus. The water is still. The reflection is very clear. He goes back to the poem. He is trying to get it right. Baiae. Italy, July 138. The room faces the sea. The Bay of Naples in summer does something specific with the light at the end of the day. It turns the water a color that does not have a precise name in Latin or Greek or any language. A color that is blue and gold simultaneously, that changes as you watch it, that seems to be in the process of becoming something else, even as you are looking at it. Hadrian has been looking at it for weeks. He is in Baiae because Tivoli became too much. The villa with its memories. The Canopus with its still water holding the sky. The rooms designed to recall Athens and Egypt, and every place he went and cannot go again. He needed to be somewhere that was not a monument to what he had built and lost. He came to Baiae, where the sea does not know who he is and does not care. And he has been sitting in this room with the poem. The poem is finished now. He reads it one more time. Animala, vagula, glandula, hospes cumesque corporis, quae nunc abibis in loca, pallidula, rigida, nudula, nec ut sols debis iocos, little soul, little wanderer, little charmer, guest and companion of the body. Where are you going now? To a place pal, Rishid, Bare, and you will not make your usual jokes. The last line, and you will not make your usual jokes. This is the line that no one who reads this poem expects. After the pale and the rigid and the bare, after the solemn address to the departing soul, this, a reference to jokes, to humor, to the specific quality of a living personality that makes jokes, that has a particular way of finding the world funny, that will not be present in whatever comes next. He was funny. This is not a fact that gets much attention in the histories of his reign, which tend toward the monumental, but the people who knew him describe a man with a genuine wit, with the particular humor that develops in people who have observed human behavior closely enough to find it absurd as well as serious. He will not make his usual jokes. He sets down the poem. He looks at the sea. He is 62 years old, and he is dying in a room that faces the bay. And the sea is doing what it has always done, and the light is doing what light does at this hour. And none of it requires his participation to continue. He thinks about the wall. It is still there. He knows this without needing a report. Stone stands until someone takes it apart. And no one is taking apart the wall in Britain because it is still serving the purpose he built it for, defining the place where Rome ends and the rest of the world begins. The soldiers who built it are mostly dead by now. The Syrian man who picked up stones in a British field and set them on other stones, but the stones are still where he put them. The wall is still drawing the line. He thinks about the Pantheon, somewhere in Rome, right now. The afternoon light is coming through the oculus and moving across the interior. In the arc it always moves through, touching the walls and the floor and the niches where the gods stand, with the indifferent democracy of light that falls where it falls. The hole is still open. The rain still comes in when it rains. He thinks about Antinos. He has thought about Antinous every day for 8 years. That is not going to stop. He has made a kind of peace with the fact that it is not going to stop. The way you make peace with certain conditions of your existence that you would change if you could and cannot. The making of peace is not the same as acceptance, and is not the same as being all right. It is just the decision to carry the thing rather than fight the carrying. The face is in the world. Whatever else he has managed or failed to manage. The face is in the world. He thinks about Jerusalem. This is the thought that does not resolve. The other thoughts have a quality of completion to them. Even the grief. Even the wall. Even the hole in the roof. They are things that happened. Things, he decided. Things that exist now in the world, in forms that he can see clearly even from this distance. Jerusalem does not resolve. He knows what he ordered. He knew what he was ordering when he ordered it. He applied the logic that had worked everywhere else. The logic of Roman order, making a space large enough for everyone. And the logic ran into something that it was not equipped to handle, and the result was 3 years of war and a number of dead that he does not say out loud, even to himself. He has not found a way to think about this that satisfies him. He cannot find the thought that holds both things. The man who completed the temple in Athens, that had been unfinished for 600 years, and the man who signed the orders that renamed Judea and banned its people from their city. He is 62 years old and dying, and he cannot find it. He leaves it where it is. The sea is doing something new with the light. The sun is lower now, and the bay has shifted from the blue gold of an hour ago into something deeper, a color that belongs to this particular hour in this particular place and is not the same as any other hour or any other place. He watches it. He has watched a lot of things in his life. He watched Trajan expand the empire to its furthest extent and understood what that meant for whoever came next. He watched the map on the wall every morning and saw what the distances actually cost. He watched Britain from the wall and decided that the fog to the north did not need to be his responsibility. He watched Athens and wanted to belong to it. He watched the light through the oculus at the Pantheon and understood what he was trying to say with that hole. He watched Antinous for 7 years, and then watched the space where Antinous had been for 8 years after that. He watched an empire that he thought he could remake in a more honest image of itself. And he remade parts of it, and other parts remade themselves in ways he did not intend. He has been watching his whole life. He does not know if the watching produced understanding. He knows it produced the poem. He thinks about the lifespan of things. The wall in Britain will stand for a long time. He cannot calculate how long. Centuries. Certainly, possibly much longer. Longer than the empire. Perhaps, which is a thought he does not dwell on. The Pantheon will stand for a long time. The dome is an engineering achievement he is quietly proud of. The way the weight distributes through the structure without requiring columns inside to interrupt the space. It will stand. The portraits of Antinous will stand as long as marble stands, which is a very long time. He has put the face in enough places and in enough forms that the attrition of centuries will not remove it completely. Some will be broken. Some will be buried and forgotten and found again later by people who will not know who they are looking at until they figure it out. And then they will figure it out. Because the face is consistent across hundreds of iterations, and the consistency will be its own evidence. The face will be found. He is certain of this. And the texts, he has been thinking about the texts. The Jewish scholars carrying their practice through the aftermath of Bar Kokhba, encoding the memory of what happened into the structure of time rather than the structure of space. He understands what they are doing better than he would like to. He has spent his reign building monuments in space. He knows what those monuments are for and what they can hold and what they cannot. What those scholars are doing is more durable. He knows this. He knows it the way he knows things. He cannot say publicly, because the knowing implies a conclusion he cannot act on now. He is dying. He cannot act on much of anything now. He can finish the poem. He looks at the last line one more time. And you will not make your usual jokes. He thinks about all the things that will not continue when he is gone. The specific quality of his attention. The willingness to go to the places rather than receiving reports about them. The interest in what was actually happening rather than what the reports said was happening. Those things will not continue. They are not transferable. He has chosen Antoninus carefully. Chosen Marcus Aurelius as carefully as a man can choose someone to carry something forward, but he cannot choose what they will actually bring to the role. That was always the limit. He has reached it. The sea is darker now. The stars will be out soon. Some of them visible from this window, including, somewhere in the southern sky, the constellation he named. He named a constellation after a 20-year-old boy from Bithynia who died in a river. The constellation is still there. The stars do not require his continued authority to remain in position. He sets down the stylus. He has said what he is going to say. The poem is finished. He looks at the sea. He is not afraid. He wants to be clear about this, at least to himself, at least here in this room where the sea does not care who he is. He is not afraid. He is curious, in the way he has always been curious, about what happens next, and also honest, in the way he has always tried to be honest, about the fact that he does not know. He has drawn lines around most things in his life. He cannot draw one around this. Now, 3 things. Hadrian's Wall stands in northern England today. You can walk along it on a November morning and feel the same wind coming from the same north and understand, in your body rather than your mind, what it means to stand at the edge of the world someone else drew. It is a ruin in the technical sense. Parts of it are reduced to foundation level. Parts of it were dismantled in later centuries for building material, which is what happens to the stones of powerful empires when the empire is gone and the stones are still there and someone needs to build a wall for a different reason. But it is still there. The man who ordered it built was a boy from a provincial town in Spain who learned Greek before he learned to be Roman, and who spent his life trying to make Rome into something more honest than what he inherited. The wall is the most visible thing he left. It is also, in a way he would have recognized, the thing that most clearly shows the limit of what he was trying to do. He built a line in the landscape and called it the edge of the world. The world did not stop at the line. The line is still there. The world is still on both sides of it. The Pantheon stands in Rome today. It has been standing for just under 2,000 years, and it is the best preserved ancient building in the world. And the reason it is the best preserved is that it became a Christian church in the 7th century and was therefore maintained through the medieval period when most other Roman buildings were being stripped for materials. The building designed to hold all the gods is now a Catholic church. The hole in the roof is still open. The rain still comes in. The light still moves through the interior in the same arc it has always moved through, at the same hours, touching the same surfaces. Hadrian designed this building. He left the roof open. He made a space large enough to hold every divine tradition he knew about and pointed it at the sky and said, through the architecture, what is out there is larger than any name we have given it. The building was preserved by people with a very specific name for what is out there. He would have found that interesting. Whether he would have found it satisfying depends on whether he was right about the hole in the roof. The rain continues to come in. The portraits of Antinous are in museums across the world. The British Museum in London has one. The Vatican museums have several. The National Archaeological Museum in Athens has one. There are others in Florence and Naples and Istanbul, and locations across the former territory of the empire that commissioned them. They are all the same face, full lips, heavy-lidded eyes, an expression that sits in the territory between contemplation and something else. Something that the people who have studied these portraits longest tend to describe with words like yearning, or looking, or almost arriving at something. The face is looking at something. Nobody knows what. 2,000 years of scholarship has not resolved it. Because the answer is not in the stone. The answer is in the person who looked at this face every day for 7 years and then spent the rest of his life turning the absence of it into a presence that could not be argued with. The face is not Antinous. The face is Hadrian looking at Antinous. That is what survived. Not the person. The looking. And the looking. In hundreds of versions, in dozens of museums, is still happening, still pointing at something, just past the visible, still not quite arriving. Outside the window, in Baiae, the sea has gone dark. The stars are out. One of them, somewhere in the southern sky, has his name on it, or rather, the name of the person he could not keep, which may be the same thing. He breathes. He breathes again. The sea does not notice. The stars do not rearrange themselves. The room is quiet in the way rooms are quiet when the person in them has stopped needing noise. Somewhere, in Britain, a soldier walks the wall in the dark. Chi does this every night. He has done it for 3 years. He is cold. He is bored in the specific way of a man who has been assigned the same stretch of stone for 3 years and knows every crack in it. He walks to the end of his section and stops and turns and walks back. He does not think about who built this wall or why. He does not think about the man dying in a room facing the sea in Baiae, or the poem being finished in that room, or the question the poem asks about where souls go. He thinks about the cold. He thinks about how many more hours until his relief arrives. He walks the wall. The fog stays where it is. The question stays where it is. Little soul, little wanderer, little charmer, where are you going now? The sea does not answer. The wall does not answer. The hole in the roof does not answer. The face in the stone is still looking at something just past the visible. The same thing it has always been looking at. The same thing it will still be looking at when everyone alive today is gone and the museums are full of different people asking the same question. Animala, vagula, blandula, little soul, still wandering, still here.